On today's episode of What the Finance podcast, I have the pleasure of welcoming Edwin Dorsey. He's the author of the Bearcave, whose goal is to expose bad companies. I think he's doing a very good job of that at the moment. So, Edwin, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Anthony, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on what the finance.
Yeah, What the Finance is a bit of a mouthful, or it depends how you want to pronounce it. It's all right. But yeah, I guess my first question, we might start it nice and simple. Just in your opinion, what is corporate misconduct and fraud? Because I know that's what you really research.
So I typically try to avoid the word fraud because that's a loaded term that can get you in trouble. I like the more broad corporate misconduct or shenanigans. And what I focus on with the Bearcave newsletter is primarily companies that are misleading investors or harming customers in some sort of way. My real focus is typically $1 to $10 billion US listed consumer tech companies misleading investors or harming customers. And the specific things I'll look for, maybe on the harming customers front, are predatory auto renewal policies. So a lot of people being forced to renew software or something like against their own will, or even after they've canceled. I'll look into cancellation policies that are unfair, unreasonable, or not being followed. So that might be a gym that has like really over the top cancellation where like 30% of their membership base is trying to cancel but can't get out of it. I'll look at consumer complaints with state AGs of just general misconduct. I'll look at companies that are like taking advantage of like gullible or elderly people. So that's like one kind of set of things. And then the other set of things is companies that are like misleading investors or lack economic substance. I like to say more bark than bite. That, if you read their filings or read their investor presentation, you'd have a very misleading view of like what the company substantially actually is. And that's the type of stuff I like to focus on. It's a lot less of like finances and numbers. In fact, in my articles, I barely use numbers at all. It's a lot less on the accounting, and it's more on like what's a company's relationship with its customers, or how is a company misleading investors about its business in some sort of way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm sure there's sort of a lot of gray area between those 2 points as well that a lot of these companies are engaging in as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I was listening to another interview that you've done recently. I think it was Wealthy on, which I really enjoyed. And you were talking about how, we're potentially currently living in the golden age, right? I think this is what someone else said as well, the golden
Yeah.
age of corporate misconduct and fraud. So I guess, can you explain maybe why that seems to be the case?
So Jim Chanos has coined the term golden age of fraud to say there's more fraud now than there's ever been. I'm not 100% sure that's completely true. It's definitely a lot more visible thanks to a lot of investigative journalism and kind of like community and individual journalism, and a lot more of attention of this in the media. So we're definitely see a lot more reporting on fraud. I think one big factor that influences like shenanigans are like just lots of easy money floating around. So if you have tons of VC firms that aren't doing their diligence, that's writing checks, that isn't doing the homework, that's going to like incentivize good people to do bad things and bad people to do worse things. It just makes the behavior degrade. Tons of easy and quick money. I also think lots of retail participation in the markets is really bad for, a lot of the egregious stuff I see. Because if you look at some of the worst things to come public in the last few years, oftentimes it's SPAC deals. They're just completely misrepresenting themselves. It's just a complete and utter nonsense. And the people buying it aren't sophisticated investors. It's just retail people who don't know any better, who think they're doing due diligence, but aren't actually doing it. So I would say those two factors, heavy retail participation and lots of easy money, kind of due to zero interest rates, a robust VC environment, those are kind of two aggregating factors for the shenanigans we've seen increase over time.
And would you say these things are cyclical as well? Because I guess if you think about it, like 2008 was probably another time, easy money, and then it all blew up. And I guess you could say recently it's sort of similar, where it's starting to blow up now. So there's almost this massive influx of capital, and then we sort of start to see these, I guess, as you mentioned there, they're maybe not the best companies. They're probably just, a lot of the time they've just raised money to maybe enrich the founders. So do you see that sort of how it goes?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Like easy money or quick money is not a good thing for like building legitimate businesses. Another thing that kind of caught my eye like by surprise is now with like a downturn or potential recession and a lot of pressure on companies, the SEC put out an interesting notice to auditors saying you need to be extra vigilant now because when downturns start to happen, that's when companies start to like fudge numbers with a little bit of channel stuffing or playing games around the end of a quarter. So that's another factor I keep in my mind.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of auditors have had a rough time recently with a lot of companies that they're looking at. Yeah, they probably haven't done the best job in some regards.
Yeah.
So the golden age, one thing that that we could say is that like people like yourself, I know there's people out there like CoffeeZilla, Marco Hodes, all these different people that they're very focused on discovering these companies and I guess bringing it to light. So that could almost say, even though it's happening a lot, there are a lot of people actually looking out for them, and it could be hopefully prevent long-term pain for investors or customers.
Yeah, and I'd say a lot of it builds on top of one another. So the way I come up with a lot of ideas is I have a very curated Twitter list. I spend hours and hours and hours every day on Twitter. And like, there'll be 10 or 20 tweets that just catch my eye. Like $1 billion company is suing a teenager who criticized the stock, or like something doesn't smell right, or a consumer who's like, complaining about a company, just stuff that like seems a little wrong. And or Mark Cahoda's tweets about a name, or Jim Chanos tweets about a name, I always just like quickly look into it and see what's up. So if you have a lot of people tweeting about it, or a lot of people posting YouTube videos, it makes it easier for me to do my job because that increases my top of funnel and lets me hit the ground running. And then if I do this, and I can like do more of the heavy lifting, do more sending FOIA requests, looking into a board history, looking into executive histories, stuff like that. And that makes it easier for all my newsletter subscribers to go in and dig even further. So it very much isn't like, oh, everybody in isolation is just starting to, dig in. It just helps build on one another. Like even me just seeing all these new activist short sellers and reading all their reports, it gives me ideas for how I can research companies. Even if I'm not looking into that individual company, it might inspire me to say, hey, I didn't know that regulator could be FOIA'd and you could get useful information from that. I never even thought of like, checking into like using certain search terms in SEC filings to find stuff faster. It builds off one another when you build in public.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's quite iterative. So if we look at that, you said you've got this field, so you've sort of put all these, you get these ideas from people, and I think this is the same for investing or anything in general. You get these ideas and you get interested in research more. What would be the next step? So you said that it could be just looking at their online presence, could be looking at their chairmans or their sort of board and what else they're involved in. What would be those next steps that you do to, I guess, get to the next part of the funnel and continuing down?
I love that question, Anthony, because for me, it's probably a little different than most people. I'm a big fan of this site called Insider Score. So one of the first things I'll do is I'll go to Insider Score, I'll put in a company's ticker, it pulls up the 10 board members or 8 board members, whoever they are, and I quickly go through each single one and look at their entire history with other public companies. I'd like do a lot of mapping, because if a board is comprised of like 5 or 6 people who serve on other boards of legitimate big companies, then that company itself, in my view, is a lot more likely to be legitimate. But a red flag would be is if there's a $1 billion company or $500 million company or recent SPAC merger, and all the board members have no public company experience, or all but one have no public company experience. It's like, hey, that doesn't make sense. Like winners attract winners, I think. Like why is this now have no legit like public market like oversight? I also look to see, sometimes you'll find a company where like a board member is involved in a lot of penny stocks, and that always is like a big red flag to me. So the chairman of The Joint, which was a $2 billion franchisor of chiropractic clinics, was you'd imagine he'd probably have a lot of other board experience. He was like involved in 3 or 4 penny stocks, which had all like fallen a ton. And it's like, that doesn't make sense. And then the other thing I look at very quickly is executive turnover. Like, how are the CFOs and CEOs turning over quickly, which could be a negative sign. But more important than that, like, is the board turning over quickly? Or is the chief accounting officers turning over quickly? Is there just like a lot of people leaving? Because oftentimes, if you're an executive at a company and you see like problems start to fester up, the number one thing you can do is, I guess you could sell stock, or you can just leave and go somewhere else. So seeing a lot of executive departures is a big thing. I'll quickly go through an investor presentation. I'm a huge proponent of using this like social media and Googling. I know some people might say, oh, that's silly. Like, what can you actually? I think you'll learn a lot from curated Twitter searches, poking around Reddit. If you look in YouTube, you can usually find one person who knows what they're talking about. I always love reading the comment sections and everything. I like to say oftentimes the comment sections are more valuable than the article or content themselves, because there'll be someone there who actually knows what they're talking about. So, seeking alpha, I don't know if the articles have a ton of value, but the comment sections certainly do. So those are kind of other things I'll do. I use this tool called Bedrock AI, which like highlights red flags in companies' disclosures. And I'll use the PCAOB auditor search tool to look not just what the auditor is of a specific company, but the specific audit partner of a specific company. And I'll try to read the SEC filings myself. And then later stage, if I'm getting more interest, I might like start sending FOIA requests on a company to get consumer complaints. So I know I said a lot there, but those are kind of, and those elements I mentioned are probably going to be much different than what a typical fund does, which is look at the numbers, put the numbers into a model, and start doing like tons of expert network calls.
Yeah, definitely. It's super interesting, as you said. It almost seems like there's layers of looking at the people at the top, and then from there, if you're finding concern, you look at, I guess, what everyone's saying about the company, and as you said there, there's the actual, that's more like the casual complaints. Then you go to the formal complaints, where I think I can't remember what you called it, but from what I understand from your the interview I was listening to, it's like they can actually write to the state, and they can make complaints to the state and to the county, and then you can actually get those complaints about the
company. So it varies by state, but most consumers, when they have problems, they try to resolve the issue with their companies. And if they can't, they might file a complaint with their state attorney general. It's kind of like a last resort. It's not something people do frequently. And depending on those states, those complaints can be public records that you can obtain through like a public records request or Freedom of Information Act request. And if you send a FOIA request, then you can get this treasure trove of maybe one complaint, maybe 10 complaints, maybe hundreds of pages of complaints on a company, which really helps me determine how egregious is the problem. How egregious is the problem? Because every business will have complaints. Everyone's going to complain about being billed or overbilled. The thing, and if you just rely on online, people might view that as frivolous. What if a competitor is writing it? How do we like trust it? But when there's like an actual document written by an actual person being sent to a regulator, it carries a lot more weight and can give you like a much better sense of how crazy the problems is. You can also see the company's response. And sometimes companies will have a robust response, like debunking the claims. Other times they'll be like, yeah, we're wrong, we're refunding the customer. And if you see 10 of those, well, they're probably wrong like hundreds of other times. One example I like to give that I wrote about recently was Planet Fitness, a really low-cost gym. Everyone kind of knows them. And they have an insane cancellation policy. You can't cancel over the phone. You can't cancel online. You can't cancel in the app. You need to go in person to a Planet Fitness, and you can't go to any Planet Fitness. You need to go to your home gym to where you signed up to cancel. And then it's like, well, what if you signed up as a college student and you moved out of town? Or what if you moved across the state and forgot to cancel your gym membership? Or what if, you signed up when you were visiting somewhere and there's tons of reasons why you might not be able to go to your Planet Fitness. So they also let you send a letter to cancel. And what was happening is I'd go to these regulators, and the consumers would say, we've sent like 3 letters. We've all been sending letters, and they just refuse to cancel our subscription. And there's nothing we can do. Like, we just keep sending them cancellation letters. We follow their policies, and they like don't let us cancel. I go in to cancel, and they say, oh, the manager's out. He can only process cancellations. Oh, you came in on a processing day. You need to come back tomorrow. You can only cancel on the 29th of February. It's like just like a lot of nonsense. And and then you see the responses. And there was like one response from Planet Fitness where a manager was saying, yeah, like we probably got your cancellation letter, but we have so many cancellation letters that we haven't processed that we can't find yours to actually cancel your account. Can you send us another letter on like the first day of the second quarter? And it's like, that's really, really egregious and makes you think like, another thing Planet Fitness does that's a whole nother level of insane is instead of billing credit cards, they force you to sign up with a debit card, because credit cards you can dispute. Credit cards, if you're billing a customer without their consent, they can dispute that. The Planet Fitness would likely lose and can't continue billing. Debit cards, there's often no dispute mechanism. So you're kind of like stuck there too. And so these companies are like getting, I don't know, it's just terrible. And you can only really truly understand the extent of it when you read the complaints. That's what gives you like a sense of, you can't do that reading filings or doing extra network calls, or getting your hands on tons of consumer complaints is the way to go.
Yeah, well, that's crazy to think, and I'm sure, unfortunately, there's lots of companies out there that are doing similar practices. I know, and this might is a big company. I think it is a Wall Street Journal where you can't have to email them or you have to call them or something to cancel your membership. And I'm not sure how, but yeah, it's probably not the same level. But there's just these barriers in place to try and prevent you from actually canceling, which just never looks good. So, um, if we look at that, so then you look at these complaints and then you're like, wow, this is ridiculous. From there, I guess we go to the next layer down. Is that when you start writing, or do you do any more research into it, or what would be the next steps?
So, I try to think like how big of an effect it'll have on a business. I like to say you could look at two businesses, identical business, identical set of numbers, one with a really happy customer base, and one with the customer base that's livid, that's trying to cancel, that feels ripped off. It's like, even though they have the same numbers and same growth rate, one with the happy customers is much more valuable than the other. So I'm trying to figure out just how egregious or how serious it is. What else do I do after the FOIA? So FOIA tends to be like later in my process of looking at companies. Then it just becomes like, read every single thing possible, read every comment on every news article, read every news list, read a few earnings calls, although don't get a ton out of those. I never really read sell side research, ironically. Go through an investor presentation, and if you have time, go through like every year's investor presentation. Did they delete any slides? Did they change any language? Why isn't there a tool that makes it easy for me to see anytime a company changes language in their investor presentation? I mean, that would seem relevant, but I don't even know of a tool that does that. There's a bunch of tools that highlight changes in SEC filings, which is good. And so I'll use that. What else will I do? There's like dozens of things. Like I read through every Glassdoor review, and then I try to see, like, sometimes Glassdoor, what they'll do is companies will try to get their employees to post fake reviews, or like, promote them to post 5-star reviews. So one time there was this company, Embark Trucking, and I looked on their site and it was like 3 1-star reviews and then a ton of 5-star reviews all on the same day. And I'm like, that's not like a normal distribution. And you look in that day, I'm like, what happened on that day? I'm like, just Google that day and the company name to see what happened. That is the exact day they announced the SPAC merger. So the day they announced their SPAC merger, they emailed all their employees and said, go post 5-star reviews so we can look good to like, and by the way, the company's fallen 99% since its SPAC merger. And it was like a joke. But just like taking in every morsel of public information and doing it over and over and over and over again is really, really useful. And like just on Twitter, like every single tweet with more than 2 likes on the company you're looking at in the last 4 years. And there's going to be a lot of nonsense, but there will be somebody, I guarantee it, who's saying something smart. So that's a lot of what I do.
Yeah, no, as you said, it's just filtering through all that abundance of information and finding the interesting stuff. So from what I'm hearing, it's the key thing that you sort of, you get that idea, could come from anywhere. Then you're sort of looking at the people higher up, so with the chairman, the board, the CEO, what experience they have, what are they connected to, etc. From there, you're looking at, I guess, the consumers. What are they saying about the company? And if it all looks bad, from there you sort of basically, I think in between you mentioned that you're looking at what the company is actually publishing as well. But then from there, you just basically get every little piece of information, and then see if everything's sort of pointing in the same direction.
Yeah, you look for consistencies, and the FOIA documents is kind of like the most helpful thing for that. But yeah.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
oftentimes, the best write-ups will be, I find a red flag, and then the deeper you look, there's even more red flags. And you look at the board, and there's even more red flags. And the consumers, there's more, and the SEC filings, there's more. Everywhere you look, it's just like it keeps exploding, this egregious stuff. And oftentimes, I'll look at something that has maybe a red flag in one area, a weak board, a weak executive team, lots of turnovers. But if I don't see the weaknesses or red flags in other areas, I'll pass. But like the most egregious stuff, it's like every 15 minutes of digging, you find something else that's kind of serious.
Yeah, definitely. And why do you focus on, I guess, companies between 1 and 10 billion? Is that just because I guess there's more of them out there and there's probably more likely chance that they're to have these issues?
So I don't exclusively, as you know, with the Airbnb report recently, I occasionally do like write on bigger companies. The thing is, when a company gets past a $10 billion market cap, or even like a $5 billion market cap, I mean, markets aren't stupid. There's usually some substance to it. It's like, you know, it's got to be like a real business in some sort of way. So it's like, and that's less of what like I prefer to focus on. What I like is a company that's risen a lot, $1 billion market cap, no one's talking about it, and it's just complete nonsense, and it's worth 90% less, or like will fall 90% or more. That's like kind of my ideal write-up. What I would never do is like Tootsie Roll, like Hershey's, like chocolate prices are going up, cocoa input prices are going up, margins will go down. That's like, that's the antithesis to what I am. That's very much not my type of focus. It's you find the most egregious stuff, the egregious conduct, with the smaller companies. Now, the reason I don't do $100 million companies or $50 million companies is it's almost too easy. It's like unfair. And I don't think anyone really cares. So like you could write a newsletter. I could write a newsletter every few days, like taking like this, exposing some nonsense $50 million company. It's like no one would really care or pay attention. But $1 to $10 billion off the beaten path, typically low short interest, typically no one talking about it on Twitter. It's like that's my sweet spot.
And who knows, next few years, the 10 billion might be the no one cares about, and it'll be the 100 billion next.
Maybe, yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, I guess if we go to Airbnb, so you mentioned that you've recently released an article. So I'm not sure if you want to explain maybe how you came across it, and then from there, the process that we just talked about.
That's a great question, how I came across it. So I've known about Airbnb for a very long time. And I was just kind of in general surprised at how much trouble they had managing their brand. It's like every month, every few weeks, I just see some horror story over and over and over again. And like some of it seems like kind of like on them. Like not all of this is weird. Like 4 people die in Mexico from carbon monoxide poisoning. And it's like, how do all Airbnbs don't have carbon monoxide detectors? Like you can fix that. Or, just tons of incidents of like cameras being like installed and places. I'm like, this is becoming like a serious issue. It's not good. So that was it. And then I was looking at an Airbnb myself, like to plan like a group travel. And I like found a nice one, and it was managed by a professional group. And I Googled the group, and I found out like, hey, they actually have it so you can book it directly on their site with them at a lower price. I think this is like not what I was expecting from Airbnb. I thought Airbnb was just millions of homeowners, disjointed listings. Airbnb is the dominant platform to connect everybody. And it's like, no, a lot of these people who are listing have their own platforms where you can book for cheaper. And more importantly, when you book directly with them, they prefer it. They get the money up front. They can control the customer relationship, whatever. But it's better for you because like you have a direct booking. There's less chance, like you prefer to directly book with the hotel rather than, booking through Expedia or something. There's just less problems that are going to occur when you book direct. So that was, just kind of interesting to me. And the more I poke around, it seemed like, hey, my perception and most investors' perceptions of Airbnb were wrong. It's going to become, in my view, dominated by professional management companies where it's not going to be individual hosts. Those days are long gone because an individual might be creepy. They don't have the benefits of scale. Who wants to stay with an individual that might cancel? You'd much rather do something like with a more professionally managed group. So in my view, Airbnb was a stepping stone where now it's going to become in every single market, there's going to be 5 or 10 companies that dominate the short-term rental, primarily focused on group travel. And it's going to be easy to book with them directly if you do a little bit of Googling. And Airbnb is going to be almost like a middleman, almost become an Expedia-like service where, we know that you can book with airlines direct, but you go to Expedia, you see which airlines are flying when and the prices. Sometimes you book through them, sometimes you book direct with the airlines, and it's just kind of how it works. And it's not like there's anything wrong with that business. It's just a lot less valuable of a business. And then the other thing that was interesting to me about Airbnb is I think there was a lot of people that kind of got allured into it with low interest rates. Oh, it's so easy, become an Airbnb millionaire, buy my course, take out huge loans. There was some Bloomberg reporting on a 29-year-old who earns 500 grand, 50 grand a year and has $1 million of loans to buy Airbnb properties. And it's just, this doesn't seem sustainable or good. And if that's part of your ecosystem, there's probably other problems. But high point takeaway, it's they haven't done a great job managing their brand. For individual travelers, hotels are better. So you're left with group travelers. But for group travel, it's kind of easy to find places on Airbnb and book directly off platform. And once you do that, all those off-platform places, the direct companies will market with you and want you to book with them directly in the future. And I don't think Airbnb's future is going to be as bright as its past has been.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's something that we've seen, I guess, with Uber and those sort of similar companies, that the venture capitalists, they're really sponsoring the I guess our rides, our stays, etc. And then it gets to the point where they actually have to start making money, and then the price just goes up to exorbitant amount. And then the old ways we did it, like hotels and taxis, are actually cheaper. So it's crazy how that's all happening.
Yeah, good analogy.
Yeah, exactly. So then from there, so you see this is I guess this isn't as much misconduct. This is more just an overvalued company from the perspective of what they're offering.
Yeah, I would say that. It's just the perception is very wrong. And I don't think most investors were aware that hey, for a lot of the listings on the platform, they're actually listed off platform for cheaper, and the person listing them would prefer it, and the person booking it would prefer it. It's why do you need Airbnb then?
Yeah, it's almost like a platform for them to get advertising to then get purchases from their own.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a lot less valuable of a business then.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really interesting. And I guess, are there any other companies that you're currently looking into, or I'm sure there's plenty.
I try not to say specific companies before I publish on them, because then everybody would be speculating and know them. But at a high level, I did a lot of good stuff on the crypto banks in November and December, specifically talking about Signature and Silvergate and their reliance on shady crypto businesses. And both of them ended up failing. And now I kind of wonder, well, what other banks could be in trouble? What other financial institutions have hidden ties to crypto that could, take them down? I'm always looking at SPAC mergers. The problem with SPAC mergers is they're often not liquid, or everybody knows what the problem is. So it's if you just write it, it's not gonna be that impactful. What else do I typically look at? I wrote on a BDC recently, so now I'm looking at other BDCs, and BDCs have great granular disclosure on all their individual loans. It's easy for me just to spend a few hours Googling on every loan in their portfolio and figure out what's going on. So that's just some of the stuff that I've been working on.
Yeah, I can imagine at the moment there's lots of different avenues you can go down.
Yeah.
But Edwin, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. So I guess my last question is, what is one message you'd like people to take away from our conversation?
Don't focus a ton on the numbers, Anthony. Focus a ton on a company's relationship with its customers. That is so much more valuable than the numbers.
Someone in finance who runs DCFs every every day, just kind of cash flows. It's hard to take, but I agree with you. The customers are really, they can a lot oftentimes tell you what you might be missing in numbers.
Absolutely. Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Anthony, for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much for coming on. And we've mentioned the bear trap, obviously, which is a really good, sorry, the bear cave, apologies, which is a really good, place that people can find your work, and you have a Substack there. Is there anywhere else that people can find what you do?
Just Google Edwin Dorsey and my Twitter will pop up. That's a great thing to follow.
Yeah, perfect. I'll put that in the description below, but thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you are notified when new podcasts are released. I hope you're leaving with some great value about investing, trading, and finance. See you on the next show.